one of the main things that they didn't change, and which remains with us, although I think it's coming under increasing attack today, is this idea of kind of market efficiency, of competition, of choice being the kind of driving forces of politics, and of needing to keep up this sort of sense that globalisation is this unstoppable force, and Britain needs to be competitive, it needs to keep up, and that's the only sort of justifying argument in many respects in terms of economics. So I think in terms of buying into that, yes, that there's this clear continuity there. But I think what they bring to that is a sense of sort of optimism that we can do that while still adhering to certain values on the left in terms of social justice, in terms of trying to create more equality, in terms of particularly, I think, issues around children and young people, things like Sure Start. There's this real sort of attempt to do something different and to involve people. There's this real emphasis on kind of localism and on participation, which I think for many complicated reasons doesn't play out, and it doesn't really work. But I think there was a real desire to do something about that. I think it's in the sort of finance economic agenda that they are more willing to continue with things as they were. Well, I think there are different questions about Blair himself and about New Labour as a project and as a period. I mean, obviously, you can't talk about any of this without talking about Iraq. And I think also the sense of Blair as being somebody who was concerned with his own image, his own place in history, perhaps more than the causes that he was sort of associated with fighting for, but also the survival of Labour values, I guess. And he was someone who had quite explicitly taken on his party's traditions and its past and its sort of sense of itself. And so then when that project came to an end, obviously there was going to be a backlash. In terms of the New Labour project more widely, I think, it does come down to this sort of acceptance of many of the sort of things which the Thatcher governments had tried to establish as common sense, this idea about markets, about competition, as being not just common sense, but as being the only way in which you can understand the way that the economy works. And for reasons that themselves have a longer history, New Labour sort of was happy to accept that as a way of getting its other agenda through, but in doing so, it basically legitimated that as the only way of viewing politics and of viewing economic choices, which has had a much more long-standing impact than perhaps they thought it would when they said they would stick to Conservative spending plans and so on. There was this kind of logic that they entrenched, I guess, and that's something that's been difficult to unpick.